Three very riveting stories. Pete, I'd actually love to start with you. I want to challenge you. I'd love to hear about a story where you had something you knew Northern Trust had to do. You were so passionate about it, but you weren't sure how that was actually going to be bought in. When you failed, what did you learn from it?
So you didn't put the when you failed in on the beforehand.
Maybe you just succeeded then. I'd love to hear the keys to that success.
So let me talk about where we are now. So I'll change it a little bit. And so as a bank, very conservative institution, we're looking at how do we actually custody cryptocurrency? Because if we custody cryptocurrency out in the marketplace and we put our brand and our name on it, there's now a legitimization of a lot of those coins that would occur. And institutions could buy into it and things like that. So from a business perspective, something we want to do. But in my discussion, I talked about the antibodies. So the antibodies, when I talk about cryptocurrency, they come out. And you have to remember that they're coming out to protect the company. But at the same point, if we don't embrace digital, and cryptocurrency is really just a metaphor for the whole world where it's going in digital, we won't have a company. We'll be disintermediated. So how do you balance that antibody saying, no, 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 you can't figure out from an AML KYC perspective who had the coins, it's bad, da 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 da, with the fact that we have to embrace digital because our whole universe is going that way? We're in the midst of that struggle. If anybody has any good ideas, I'm open, I'll be around after, all right? Because it's not easy. And the way we get through it is just logic. We just have to sit down.
So let's dig into this. Like, do you classify the antibodies? Are there specific classifications and ways in which you approach the different sets of antibodies?
So yeah, there's the risk, okay? So clearly the risk antibodies are the ones that say, you know, that we will get written up by the Federal Reserve for AML KYC, and therefore we shouldn't do it, right? There's the IT piece. Wow, if we do that, then we're going to be open up for everybody. All the people will come in, and they'll start hitting our firewalls, and they'll try to attack us. So you can't do that, because that will be crazy. And there's the business side, who say, how much money are you going to make? Is it really worth it? And why don't we wait 10 years, and when they let the market move, and then we'll catch up after everybody else figures it all out. So you can
Seems like you know the personas pretty well there. What are some tips to work with these antibodies to actually towards a force of good?
Yeah, and I think the number one thing is realize that they're smart people, they're coming from a place that is actually quite positive and good. They're trying to protect the company. And if you listen and you find out what they're trying to accomplish and you work with them to come up with solutions, you get there. If you fight, you'll lose.
It's a great tip. Phil, you talk a lot about enterprises and startups. You might say that they speak different languages, don't they? Yeah. So what did you learn from the translation, and can you tell us about a time where there was a struggle to understand each other, and what did you learn from that instance?
We're actually going through one right now. So we've not ended an engagement, reached the end of a proof of concept with a company right now, and we're in this transition phase of we think it's really valuable, they have some amazing AI capability, and how do we actually bring this into the organization? Where does the entry point for Whirlpool exist without causing too many problems? So the idea on our side is, okay, what is the business willing to accept, but also what can our engineering teams and the teams that we interface with from a design perspective, where can they get the most value to then sell into the business? The big leap that we end up seeing kind of failing is when you try to force fit it into an organization that's not willing to accept it, because then that exit path ends up having all of the things I talked about, where you're going to have your terms of the agreement, the terms of the development aren't going to be clear for each side. And when you're talking with a startup, they're trying to understand what's my product market fit, what's my path to scale, and all of these things they're balancing in their head. Then they have to go back to their board and justify why should I deprioritize a relationship with maybe a competitor of ours or another organization to work on this thing with Whirlpool. And so not only are we trying to help our organization understand why we think it's valuable, we're trying to help the startup sell that story into their organization of why they should work with us. And so right now we're working through that with a company we think very highly of. But again, it's this give and take, and it's never really 100% figured out. but you try to get to a place where we can start just to move forward and inch forward and inch forward, where, and usually with large corporations, we want to know what are the next 6 months going to look like, pay for everything up front, reduce that risk and that cost, where we're probably going to work in 2-week increments.
Do you find that that's a challenge when it's undefined, not completely structured? And how do you get people within Whirlpool to be comfortable with that?
Well, we have our organization in advanced development and innovation where we're working in that space right now. So the things that we're working on are much less defined. We're very iterative, and so our organization can take on that risk a little better than some of the other more traditional development organizations. And so being able to have that kind of buffer layer to bring something in, have it mature a little bit, and not be under the thumb of the larger corporate so much, gives us that breathing room then to say, okay, if this potentially doesn't work out, it's not going to be a huge risk to the organization. So there's a little bit of a buffer layer for us right now.
Does it feel like you have to have extreme persistence or bravery while you're trying to fight the current around this?
Yeah, it does. And the big thing too is being able to communicate that in a meaningful way to the startup so they don't get discouraged or worried. And also within your organization, being able to have people that are passionate around these technologies in the consumer to be able to say, hey, this is the benefit we can potentially provide, and be able to communicate that story successfully to leadership so that they give you essentially the breathing room and the window to pursue some of these things.
Great, thanks, Phil. Vivek, I was very, very touched by the customer centricity and the adoption. That had to be a long journey for you. Can you just let's dig in a little deeper about that journey, the struggles. Was customer centricity a core value of Northwestern Mutual, and how did you gain the buy-in of that?
Yeah, it was really, really hard. Okay, because what I'd say is it is a relationship-oriented business, and the dynamic that we had against us is the advisors wanted to be the face to the customer, right? So in the end of the day, we're building for the customer directly, but the advisors are in the mix. It's kind of a B2B2C model, and how do we become customer obsessed knowing that the advisor is there as well, and in many facets, they're our customer as well, right? So a lot of it was really understanding, not the business, I'd say, which I think, by the way, it's important. A lot of folks on the digital team feel like they need to understand the business. Important, but I think more importantly is understand how does the business work. So we spent a lot of time understanding how are the advisors engaging, right? Funny story is, in the financial world, a pie chart is the way that you show your finances, right? It's always been the way that you share your finances. Advisors have actually built it into their script, and they actually say, Vivek, this is a slice of your pie that can go this way versus that way. We decided that on mobile devices, a bar chart would be better, because why not? It's cooler. And when we did that, we realized all the advisors didn't like it, right? And it actually disrupted our business. It was a fail on our part because we didn't understand how the business was working and how the advisors are spending day in and day out. Funny story, a year later, we've actually enabled bar and pie chart, and you can actually toggle the switch, and I just checked the stats before this call, it's still 50-50, right? So, I think to answer your question, it was a lot of spending. Yes, we were customer obsessed, yes, we were customer centric, but we also were mindful of the fact that the relationship is core, and how do you find that balance, and how do you kind of instrument digital solutions that fit on both sides of the coin?
As adoption increased for your digital products, what were the things that you did to make sure that adoption was actually taking place and usage was happening? It sounded like you built the bridge to the advisors.
Yep.
What were the other things that you did to engage your customers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, building the bridge to the advisors was actually very key because a lot of this starts with a meeting with the advisor, and then they come back to you weeks, months later, right? What we started building is this experience where you can log on and link your assets. Imagine your non-NM assets, your credit card, your Bank of America, et cetera, your home. Start showing budgets, insights, spending insights. All of that was geared at providing you triggers and notifications on how your portfolio is performing, where's your money moving. We even built in alerts. When I watch the Giants lose every Monday, I would get an alert saying that I'm down 1%, and I just want to know why. Allowing to have these self-service tools that are really enabling you to have insight. But when it comes to life, death, money, emotion, because that's what insurance is, you can connect with your advisor, right? And your advisor has all that information that you linked, as well as you, and having that insight. So that was a big area. The second, what I'd say, is self-service. This is just a problem I think my financial institution friends would share. Changing your beneficiary forms. I remember a talk this morning, someone brought up a fax machine, like, geez, we still use fax machines. but how can you change your beneficiary forms, pay for your bills, make that all seamless and make that a self-service experience? Because I can do it on Amazon, why can't I do it on nm.com, right? So we started building a lot of that in to really enable the advisor to spend more time talking about the relationship and less time talking about the administrative actions.
Great. Do either of you want to talk a little bit about customer centricity and how that's impacted your organization?
Sure. We are a client-centric organization, but I think, back to the other comment, clients want to talk to people when they want to talk to people. And so and it's not an epiphany, I think everybody's realized it, but in the strategy, it's really important to say, you've got to have all of the ways possible for a person to interact with you. And that communication model, when it's the consumer, all right, that starts to work, right? So you have all the tools. Where it gets really difficult now for us is how do you become client-centric when maybe you on Microsoft Teams and you want to collaborate with a client, but they're on Slack. Oh, but your IT folks say, wait a minute, Slack here? What about Symphony? And next thing you know, do you sit there and say, this is our way to do B2B? Or do you sit down and say, you can do anything and everything? Hard decisions as all these fintechs create new tools to do collaboration across clients.
Yeah, on our side, very product-centric organization traditionally, right? You think white goods, you think appliances. It doesn't scream human-centered design, and that's been a really big shift for us in the last 5 to 10 years. Is okay, really placing the consumer, and even as we've moved towards more of a digital transformation, IoT, and that space becomes that much more important. Understanding that the consumer doesn't just exist around a washing machine the entire day, or doesn't exist around a range the entire day. That all these other things are factoring into their life, and those particular interaction points, whether it be through journey mapping or other tools like that, lets you understand, okay, if I'm designing intentionally for this particular moment in time and I understand the context of that person's life, what does this experience now look like? I'm not just doing features and benefits, I'm now understanding the emotional context, the environmental context, what else is going on, and that becomes really important for us. And when we talk about working within an ecosystem like Seamless, who I talked about, is that you understand that these consumers have relationships with all these other companies as well, right? That person's sitting in a steel case chair at work, working with either Slack, Microsoft Teams, something like that. They're potentially interacting with Amway in some way. You understand, okay, everyone's trying to vie for the same piece of the pie. Why would they choose me, or what's going to make me potentially stand above everything else, or what's going to make them want to come back and participate in the ecosystem that we're trying to create?
One of the statements we made was, you can have a vision, but at the heart, it's about the people. Can you talk a little bit about how your organization and culture contributes to how you continue to innovate and have new breakthroughs? And I'll turn it to whoever wants to take it.
Go ahead.
Sure, I'll go first because this is like something I'm so passionate about. But I think people is just key to culture change, and that's why I said the startup culture isn't the right one, or the big company. We took the blend and created our own. I'm fortunate enough to manage folks on the Midwest as well as New York. First of all, that's two different personalities. If you want to hear about that over 1 to 7 beers, we can do that later. But I think then bringing that dynamic, also big company startup. So we spend a lot of time finding in these pod teams who are the right folks, right? What I didn't share in that talk is every pod team has 2 leaders because there's 2 planes on a pilot for a reason, right? We pick someone that's more product-y, that focuses on user experience, et cetera, research, and someone that's more techie that focuses on tech code reviews, and then the rest of the folks comprise the team. And those 2 people, sometimes they're both in New York, sometimes one's in New York, one is in Milwaukee, sometimes they don't like each other, but they're great employees, and it's a lot like dating. In many ways, we had to spend a lot of time to find the right personality fits, just things that make sense and where people can jive and work well together. And for us, it's just we figured out that sauce, but it wasn't easy. It took a lot of iterations. And the other thing I'd say is spending a lot of time finding the best in people, right? Finding where they can excel and really understanding some of their skill sets and where some of their passions lie, and just showing them the way. The last thing I'd say is grassroots. We love to go grassroots. We started with something, and then our first pod team, and we had lunch and learn, showing the rest of the organization. It was a lot like a fashion trend, right? Because someone's doing it, everyone wanted to know why. And we spent a lot of time kind of educating our people through grassroots, because the CEO can't just walk in and say, you got to do it this way. That's not going to work. It has to spread through the organization.
Great.
Yeah, I listened to a speech once where someone said, it was to a bunch of executives, and said basically, well, it was about diversity. And they said, if you think diversity is, and you're struggling with male, female, people of color, et cetera, and that's the issue, you should just leave right now because you should have figured that out a long time ago. What we're talking about is diversity of, are you hiring everybody from your alma mater? So, is that where you're getting it? You've got to diversify that. It's everything you just said because, and the issue, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the story said was that NASA was hiring people from Georgia Tech as engineers years ago, and then they realized that they didn't have any supercomputer skills until they started recruiting from University of Illinois because the engineering at U of I was all supercomputer based and really, really strong there, and they got much more diversity around their thought process. So diversity at one level, yes, it's what we know. At another level, it is everything else.
And I really like when you talk about understanding the nature of your company. I think that's a layer below culture, right? The idea that Whirlpool is going to all of a sudden become a search, essentially compete with Google. Like that's not the nature of our company. And so understanding what are those things that you're fundamentally good at over the last 100 years in our case, and then layering on top of where do you want to get to, and understanding that there isn't one model, there isn't one culture that beats others. It's what works for you and works for your consumer. A lot of times, we work with consultants and things like that, and they come in and like, this is the thing you have to do. They don't know your company as well as you do. They don't know your people. They don't know all of those intricacies over the last 100 years. And my favorite example of a company that ignored their nature and they've come through it is Microsoft, right? So the end of the Ballmer era, he was like, I'm going to be a functional organization. We're going to copy Apple. And we all saw how that worked. You had an organization that had been siloed forever, and now you're going to have them share resources across and be matrixed. It didn't work. And then Satya came in and said, okay, we're going to embrace the nature of Microsoft and really say, okay, we're going to lean into being enterprise software and have this Azure cloud. I'm going to actually do away with the Windows name. Like it was understanding what the nature of an organization is and really layering the culture on top of that to get that competitive advantage back. Yep.
So I want to thank the three of you as we are down to time. If I can key over my last slide, it is a last thought for all of you. So actually, have you thought about the time where you last traveled abroad? How did you feel? Last month, I was very fortunate to travel to Portugal with some of my fellow alumni from Kellogg all around the globe. And I actually got to learn and feel what it felt like. It was the connection. And you heard our three panelists today talk about the connection to the people, whether it's your customers, your teams, as you're working throughout your organization. The culture you create actually transcends any language. I didn't know Portuguese, but I got around and felt connected to the old and the new. And so I really encourage you to think about, what are you going to do tomorrow to create your moonshot? What are the things that you're going to do for your people? Take that crowbar to take that sign down and push those boundaries. Thank you for your time and attention today.